Classification in data governance is a fairly simple concept, and I'm going to walk you through the new classification feature of DGE 7.1. So I'm logged into the manager as a data governance administrator. Here are my menu options over here. We have this new menu option for classification. So I'll select classification, and this view appears where you see the classification levels that are currently assigned to your organization. Now, these are the out-of-the-box classifications. DGE will actually install these classification levels by default. So the first time you deploy your data governance server, the data governance service will actually check and see whether or not these classification levels have been installed. If they haven't, they'll be installed by default. So we have a default set of classification levels, which you'll see in front of you. There's 4 levels: no restrictions, internal use only, restricted, and critical handling. So these are, as I said, our out-of-the-box classification levels that you can use to get started with classification. There's nothing that stops you from editing these classifications, deleting them, all of them entirely, and then starting with a set of classifications that would meet your organizational classification requirements. For example, you might want to set these classification levels to match whatever third-party classification vendor you have on site. So just so you know, it's a very simple concept within data governance. Simple out-of-the-box classification levels. I can add a new one quite easily here. So I can type one called, let's call it basic classification. Regular documents, whatever regular means, go in here. And there's my new classification level. I go OK. And now I have a new classification level that I can use to classify governed data with. That is one of the things that is very important to understand with classification in DGE. Currently, the classification feature is the assignment of classification to governed resources. So governed resources are the subset of your resources that should have more control. You want to write company policies against them. You want to do attestations, things like that. So with these classification levels, that allows the owner of resources, the business owner, to assign classification levels to those resources that they own. So I'm going to go to the web portal, and I'm logged in as myself, Matthew Muse, but I'm a business owner of governed data. So under my identity, my responsibilities, we have governed data. So select governed data and you'll see the governed resources that I own. I own one folder, which is the finance folder. I'm going to select that. And we have this tab for classification. So you can see that I've already classified my resource as internal use only. It gives me the description, and it also has a text field where I can enter a justification why I feel the resource that I own is of that specific classification level. So at the time, I had classified this as internal use only. Well, I might decide that the information has changed. I feel the classification level of my resource has changed, so I'm going to change it from internal use only all the way to critical handling. And now it gives me the description of what critical handling actually means within my organization. So I read that, I'm okay with that, and I'm just going to write a justification. I'll say this folder contains credit card information. Very sensitive information, so I've made my decision that I need to increase the classification level. I'm going to go save, and there you go. I've just reassigned a classification level to my resource. So, and I can do it at any time I want. And now it is critical handling. So any company policies or more periodic attestations that are required per different classification levels can be handled based on the manual assignment of classification level. So that's what the business owner can do. And then if you go to the overview, you can see the classification level assigned right there. A business owner is restricted to pick a classification that is in those pre-assigned classification levels that you saw in the manager. A business owner is not able to classify something outside of those levels. So I am not able to free type here. I have to pick one of those levels that are there. right? Does that make sense? The other things you can do is, of course, with DGE, we have PowerShell capabilities around classification. So I can actually get the classification. That's what I want. Get-Q classification level configuration. So you can see here that I have the classifications that I have in my system right now. I can add a new classification, add -Q classification level, name, give it a name, test classification, give it a description, enter. The classification level has been added. Now if I run get-Q classification level configuration, we'll see my new classification level there. And then in the manager, of course, if I close classifications here and click now, you'll see the new classification levels there. So that is classification in DGE 7.1. As part of classification, we've also added some out-of-the-box features that take advantage of those classification levels. For example, in company policies, there is a new out-of-the-box company policy related to governed data, which is governed data must be assigned to a classification level. And this is basically saying that if you have any governed resources that have not been assigned classification, then they will violate this policy. So this is a simple example showing of how you can take advantage of the classifications that have or have not been assigned to a governed resource. So that's company policies. And then another out-of-the-box add-on to DGE that we've added is risk. So for risk index functions, for governed data, you can see that there's a new risk index function that uses the classifications as part of the uses classification as part of the calculation. So if you have a governed resource that has no classification level assigned, then as part of the calculation of risk of that governed resource, we will increment the risk by 0.1. So again, out of the box, showing you some of the capabilities, some things that you can do against classification as it is associated with governed data.